Nobody ever wrote his name down anywhere. No school register, no doctor's file, no birthday cake with candles. Just a small boy living in a city of millions. Invisible in the most complete way a person can be invisible. His name was Mateo. He was 7 years old, and the world had already decided it had no space for him. He lived in a neighborhood on the edge of Bogota, Colombia, where the roads turned from broken pavement to dry dirt, and the buildings had more cracks than paint. The people there were not bad people. They were just tired people, tired of waiting for things to get better. Tired of hoping. Most of them kept their heads down and moved through each day the best they could. Mateo's mother had left sometime around his 6th birthday. There was no dramatic goodbye. She was simply there one day and gone the next, swallowed by a life that had already taken too much from her. She didn't leave a note. She didn't leave a plan. She left behind one small boy who didn't fully understand what had happened, only that the person who was supposed to stay had gone. An elderly woman in the same building took him in. Her name was Donna Carmen. She was small and slow-moving, with kind eyes and a cough that never fully went away. She had very little. A single room, a gas burner, a mattress on the floor. But she gave what she had. She fed Mateo when she could. She let him sleep beside her. She never once turned him away. But Donna Carmen was old and tired, and had never expected to raise a child at her age. So Mateo spent most of his days outside, on the streets, by himself. He was not a sad boy. Exactly. He was a watching boy. He watched the fruit sellers stack their mangoes in careful pyramids each morning. He followed stray dogs down side streets just to see where they went. He taught himself to count by reading the numbers on passing buses. He learned which shop owners were kind and which ones would shout at him to move along. He learned the sounds of the neighborhood. Which hours were loud, which were quiet. Which alley echoed the most when you clapped your hands. He was bright in the way children become bright when no one is teaching them anything out of pure necessity, out of curiosity, out of having nothing else to do but pay attention. And then one afternoon, everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way the most important things often do. He was walking past an old church building that had been turned into a small community center. The doors were shut, the windows were high up on the wall, but one of them, just one, was cracked open, and from somewhere inside, floating out into the dusty afternoon air, came a sound he had never heard before in his life. A piano? He didn't know that was what it was called. He didn't know anything about it. He only knew that the sound stopped him completely, right there on the pavement, mid-step, like someone had pressed a pause button on him. It was a slow melody, gendele, a little sad, going up and then curling back down like it was searching for something it couldn't quite find. It moved through that cracked window and landed somewhere deep inside his chest. He sat down on the pavement, right there, and listened. He didn't move for 3 hours. People walked past him. A man on a bicycle nearly clipped his foot. A woman with a heavy bag stepped around him without looking down. He didn't notice any of it. He just sat there with his eyes half closed, taking in every note, storing them somewhere inside himself like they were something precious he needed to keep safe. When the sound finally stopped and the building went quiet, Mateo stood up slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep. He looked at the building for a moment, then he walked back home. He came back the next Tuesday, and the Thursday after that. Week after week, he came and sat by that wall. The lessons happened inside. Children whose parents paid a small fee to a volunteer music teacher who gave her time every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. The fee was not large by most people's standards, but for a boy with nothing, it was impossible. So he never knocked. He never asked to come in. He only sat outside and listened, and let the music reach him through the wall. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to learn. He started moving his fingers against his knee while he listened. Not randomly, deliberately, following the notes, tracing the melodies on his own leg like it was a keyboard. He didn't know the names of any notes. He had no idea what he was doing, had a name. He was just doing what felt natural, the same way he had taught himself to count on buses. Then one Thursday in October, a regular afternoon. Nothing special about it. The door opened. The teacher stepped outside between lessons. She was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had been teaching music in that community center for years, watching children come and go, some passionate, some dragged in by their parents, most somewhere in between. She almost walked back inside without noticing him, but something made her stop. There was a boy sitting in the dirt beside the wall. His eyes were closed. His lips were pressed together in concentration, and his fingers, his small, thin fingers, were moving against his knee in a pattern that was not random. She stood very still and watched. She recognized what he was playing. It was Beethoven's Traumfahrerlies. Asterisk. She had been teaching that piece to a student inside just 20 minutes before. She walked over slowly and stood in front of him. He opened his eyes and looked up at her, not startled, not embarrassed, just calm and direct, the way children are before the world teaches them to feel self-conscious. "Do you know what you're playing?" she asked him. He thought about it for a second. "It's the one that goes slow in the middle," he said. "The sad one." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Come inside." He followed her in without hesitation, like some part of him had always known this moment was coming. She pulled out the bench at the old upright piano, an instrument that had seen better decades. With a couple of sticky keys and a pedal that squeaked him, she told him to sit down. He sat. He looked at the keys. Then he placed his hands on them the way he had seen the other children do through the window. And he played. It wasn't perfect. His hand position was all wrong. His posture was stiff. He hit a few wrong notes in the middle and had to slow down and find his way back. But the melody was there, completely there, note by note, shaped with a feeling that had no business being inside the fingers of a child who had never once touched a piano key in his life. The teacher stood behind him and didn't say a word. When he finished, he turned around and looked at her, waiting. Not for praise, just waiting, like he was ready for whatever came next. She took off her glasses, folded them in her hand, and made a decision right there in that quiet room. He would have lessons. Free. No forms, no fees, no questions. She would teach him for as long as she was able. It wasn't a grand announcement. She didn't make a speech about it. She simply pulled up a chair beside the piano bench, sat down next to him, and said, "Let's start from the beginning." Outside, the street was the same as always. Loud and dusty and indifferent. But in that small room, something had shifted. A door had opened for a boy the world had never once bothered to look at. And this time, he was on the inside. The lessons didn't fix his life. Not right away. Not even close. There were still mornings when Mateo woke up and there was nothing to eat. Still nights when Dona Carmen's cough kept them both awake, and the room felt too small and too cold at the same time. The city outside didn't slow down for him. The streets didn't get any kinder. The same problems that had been there before, he found the piano, were still there after. Because music doesn't chase away hunger, and a beautiful melody doesn't pay for shoes. But something had changed inside him. And that, it turned out, mattered more than anyone expected. He showed up to every lesson. Through rain, through days when his stomach was empty, through the weeks when the electricity at the community center cut out and the teacher had to light a candle and they would sit together in the warm, flickering light going over music theory on a piece of paper because the piano itself was useless without power. He never once asked to skip. He never once complained. The teacher noticed everything. The way he absorbed a new piece faster than students who had been coming for years. The way he didn't just copy the notes, he felt them, shaped them, added something personal to them that she couldn't teach and couldn't explain. She had been giving music lessons for a long time. She had taught children who were talented, children who worked hard, and a rare few who were both. But Mateo was something she hadn't quite encountered before. He played like the music already lived inside him, and the piano was just the tool he'd been waiting to find. Still, the world outside that little room remained complicated. Twice, local social workers came to check on his situation. Both times, the paperwork stalled. The system was slow and stretched thin, and a boy without documents was difficult to place anywhere official. Dona Carmen did her best to answer questions and fill out forms, but her hands shook and her memory was not always reliable, and nothing ever fully moved forward. Mateo existed in a gap, too young to manage alone, too forgotten to be properly helped. He kept going to the piano. Then, when he was 11, something small happened that changed everything. A priest from a nearby church had heard about the boy from the teacher. Mentioned it over dinner one evening to an old friend, a woman who wrote occasional human interest pieces for a regional newspaper. She was curious enough to come and watch one Thursday lesson. She sat in the back of the room with a notepad on her knee and told herself she would stay for 20 minutes. She stayed for 2 hours. The article she wrote was not long. It ran in the newspaper with a single photograph. Matteo sitting at the old upright piano, his back straight, his eyes focused downward on the keys, completely lost in whatever world the music took him to. The journalist didn't exaggerate. She didn't dress the story up. She just told it plainly, the way it was. A boy with nothing who had found something. The article was shared by a few people, then a few more. Someone posted it in an online group. Someone else translated a portion of it into Spanish for a different audience. And then, in the way that real stories sometimes travel when they're true enough, it crossed an ocean. A Colombian-born concert pianist living in Madrid saw it one evening while scrolling through her phone. She had spent years running a small non-profit that helped gifted children from difficult backgrounds get access to proper music education. She had seen many cases. She had read many stories, but she looked at that photograph for a long time before she put her phone down. 3 weeks later, she was on a flight to Bogota. She came without fanfare. No cameras, no announcement. Just a woman with a carry-on bag and a set of questions she needed answered in person. The teacher met her at the community center on a Thursday afternoon. Matteo had no idea who this visitor was, or why she was sitting in the back of the room. He only knew that today was a lesson day, and lesson days were non-negotiable. So he sat down and he played. Afterward, the pianist asked him to try a few things. A scale, a short piece, a melody she hummed and asked him to repeat back. She watched his hands. She watched his face. She asked him to play something he had made up himself, something that wasn't anyone else's music. He paused for a moment, a little uncertain. Then he played something slow and unfinished sounding, a melody he had been carrying around in his head for weeks without ever giving it a name. It wandered a little, doubled back on itself, found a quiet place and stayed there for a few bars before fading out. The room was very still when he stopped. The pianist looked at the teacher. The teacher looked at the pianist. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then the pianist leaned forward and asked Matteo one question. "When you play, what are you thinking about?" He considered it honestly, the way he considered most things. "Nothing," he said. "When I play, I stop thinking. It's the only time everything goes quiet." That was the moment she made up her mind. What followed was slow and careful and nothing like a fairy tale. There were legal processes to work through, documents to gather, arrangements to be made. The nonprofit did something it had never done before. It didn't just fund lessons. It funded a life. A legal guardian was arranged, a trusted woman from the neighborhood who had known Matteo for years, and had quietly watched over him from a distance for almost as long. School enrollment was sorted. Regular meals, a stable place to sleep, and a piano. Not the old community center upright with the sticky keys. A reale. One, properly tuned, properly maintained, carried up 2 flights of stairs by 3 volunteers and placed in the small room that was now his. The night it arrived, Matteo sat in front of it and didn't play for a long time. He just looked at it. Donna Carmen had been brought along for the evening. She sat in a chair in the corner, tired but smiling, her hands folded in her lap. The room was quiet. Outside, the city carried on the way it always did, indifferent, loud, busy with its own concerns. Then he placed his hands on the keys and played the unfinished melody. The one with no name, the one that wandered and doubled back and found that quiet place. Only this time it didn't fade out. This time, it kept going past where it had always stopped before, into something new. Something that hadn't existed until that exact moment. Donna Carmen closed her eyes and listened. The years that followed were not without difficulty. Growth rarely is. There were hard lessons at the conservatory. Moments of self-doubt. Days when the distance between where he had come from and where he was trying to go felt enormous. But he had learned something important on the streets of that neighborhood. How to be patient. How to pay attention. How to keep showing up, even when nothing seemed to be moving. At 16, he received a full scholarship to a music conservatory in Madrid. At 18, he performed as a soloist with a regional orchestra. He stood on that stage in simple dark jacket, looked out at a full house, and played. The teacher was in the front row. She had taken a bus for 4 hours to be there. Backstage afterward, Matteo found her in the small crowd of people waiting. He took her hands in his. Her old hands, soft and a little shaky now. And he looked at her. The way you look at someone when ordinary words feel too small. You opened the window, he told her. She shook her head. You were already listening, she said. I just let you in. He had started with nothing. No home that was truly his. No school. No path forward that anyone could point to and say, there, that way. Just a boy sitting on a pavement outside a cracked window, storing music inside himself, like something precious he had found and refused to let go of. It turned out that was enough. It turned out it was everything.